Detroit, 1984. Cold case solved. Arrest shocks community. September 2013. A heavy atmosphere shrouded the abandoned Packard plant on Detroit's east side, less than 4 miles from downtown. The skeletal remains of the old automobile factory rose like a steel graveyard, twisted beams, collapsed roofs, and graffiti-scarred walls stretching across 40 acres of urban wilderness. Inside the labyrinth of ruined corridors, Chief Demolition Engineer Marcus Lowell moved slowly, his boots crunching broken glass and rust flakes with each step. A thin beam from his flashlight cut through the swirling dust, gliding over rusted conveyor belts, hollowed-out machinery, and dangling electrical wires. He had supervised demolition sites for 21 years, but the Packard plant was different, haunted in a way words failed to describe. It felt alive, watching. Tonight was supposed to be a routine structural check, but routine ended the moment his flashlight grazed the floor of the South Mechanical Hall. There, beneath cracked concrete, a steel plate welded into the floor, its surface completely concealed under decades of dust. Marcus crouched, wiped debris aside, and frowned. "This wasn't in any blueprint," he muttered. The original 1903-1957 design documents included no such panel, no underground chamber, no reinforced compartment, and certainly no sealed metal vault hidden beneath a concrete slab. He touched the plate. Cold. Too cold. A chill pricked the back of his neck. He raised his radio. "Control, this is Lowell. I need backup at the old Packard plant and send the forensics team." His voice echoed through the steel corridors, bouncing off rusted walls and collapsed air ducts. He stood up, sweeping the room with his flashlight, heart thudding harder with every second. What he had stumbled upon was not a structural reinforcement, not a safety installation. It was a secret, a hidden chamber forged with industrial-grade welding, a job too expensive and precise for mere vandalism. Something was buried here, and Marcus Lowell suddenly understood. Tonight's demolition inspection had turned into something entirely different. By the time backup arrived, 3 demolition crewmen and 2 Detroit police officers, the sun had fully set, plunging the Packard plant into darkness. Only their flashlights flickered across the concrete ruins. "Show us," Officer Denise Turner said. Marcus pointed to the steel plate. The officers knelt, tapping and listening. "Hollow," said Officer Grant. "Cut it," Turner ordered. A demolition crew member unpacked an oxyacetylene torch, sparks showering as he sliced through the steel. When the plate finally loosened, the officers pried it open. A gush of air, cold, stale, preserved for decades, poured out. Turner shined her light downward. A ladder descended into darkness. The officers exchanged tense glances. Turner went first. The ladder led into a cramped, welded steel chamber barely 10 feet long. The air smelled of rust and rot. And in the far corner, Turner stopped breathing. A body lay curled in the fetal position, or what was left of one. The remains were mummified from decades of isolation, clothing fused to bone, hair preserved by dry air, skin clinging tightly to the skull. But one thing stood out. Around the corpse's neck hung a rusted locket. Inside, a faded photograph, a teenage girl smiling. Detective Aaron Cole had seen that face countless times. The girl from 1984. Lydia Marsh. The cold case that had destroyed his life had just burst back open, and Detroit's longest unsolved disappearance had resurfaced from beneath the Packard plant floor, hidden, sealed, and forgotten, until now. Detective Aaron Cole, now 67, awoke to the shrill buzz of his landline phone. His heart raced. Even after a lifetime in law enforcement, late-night calls never felt normal. He reached for the phone. Cole. "Detective, it's Turner," came the voice. "You need to get down to the Packard plant, now." Cole sat up, rubbing his eyes. Turner's voice was different, tight, strained. "What happened?" he asked. There was a pause, a heavy one. "We found something sealed under the South Mechanical Hall." Cole's pulse quickened. "What kind of something?" Another pause. "A body." Cole's breath caught in his throat. Turner continued quietly. "A teenage girl. Long red-brown hair. Clothing consistent with the 80s. And Cole," she hesitated. There's a locket with a photo inside. The room spun. Lydia Marsh. He didn't need her to say the name. Cole had lived with the ghost of that 18-year-old girl for nearly 4 decades. Her missing poster hung framed on his office wall. Her case file sat on his nightstand, opened so many times the pages were nearly falling out. His biggest failure, his lifelong burden. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, Cole whispered, grabbing his coat despite his trembling hands. The drive to the Packard plant felt unreal. Detroit streetlights streaked past like comets, and every memory from 1984 pounded back into his mind. Lydia's mother crying in the interview room, the black pickup truck seen near the alley, the tire tracks that led nowhere, the suspect he had always believed was involved, but had never been able to prove guilty. Vincent Hale. He whispered the name under his breath like a curse. When Cole reached the plant, officers had already taped off the entrance. Forensics vans lined the street. Blue and red lights flickered across the crumbling facade. Turner met him at the gate. "You all right?" she asked gently. Cole nodded stiffly. "Show me." They led him to the steel chamber. Flashlights illuminated the mummified remains. Forensics techs snapped photos. Others cataloged clothing fragments, hair strands, and the rusted locket. Cole stared at the body, throat thick, eyes burning. After so many years, here she was. "After almost 40 years, he whispered. Turner gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll reopen the investigation immediately," she said, "and you'll lead it." Cole swallowed. "At my age?" Turner held his gaze. "Nobody knows this case like you." Cole nodded, feeling something ignite inside him. A fire he thought had died decades ago. This time, he would not fail Lydia Marsh. Not again. 6 hours later, after supervising the initial forensic sweep, Detective Cole sat alone inside the temporary investigation tent near the plant entrance. On the table lay Lydia's locket, freshly photographed. The edges rusted, the clasp fused shut, but the tiny photo inside still visible, Lydia smiling beneath the summer sun. Cole closed his eyes. He remembered the Marsh family house in 1984, freshly painted blue walls, flowers in the front yard, Lydia's bedroom filled with paintings and brushes. He remembered her mother's trembling hands as she clutched her daughter's sketchbook. "She never walks alone," Helen Marsh had said. "She always calls me before leaving work." But on that July night in 1984, Lydia never made it home. Cole opened the old case file, its cracked edges and faded ink almost sacred to him. He reread the key details. Last seen, 8:47 p.m. Location, Maplewood Street. Witness report, black pickup truck idling nearby. Evidence, partial tire tracks, fiber from shirt. Primary suspect, Vincent Hale. Case status, unsolved, closed 1986. Over the years, Cole had interviewed everyone. Friends, co-workers, neighbors. Every alibi but one had checked out clearly. Vincent Hale, the quiet mechanic in East Detroit, a man with no criminal record, no violence in his past, and a reputation for helping neighbors for free. But something had always been off. He refused multiple interviews. He claimed he was working the night Lydia vanished, yet no employee could verify it. His black pickup truck mysteriously disappeared months after the incident. Cole had tried to push the department to dig deeper, but without evidence, they shut him down. Now, with Lydia's body recovered, murder confirmed, Cole knew the investigation would finally have teeth. But 40 years was a long time. People changed, memories blurred, suspects built new lives. Cole exhaled deeply. He had one more reason to reopen the hunt, one he had never told anyone. In 1984, on the night Lydia disappeared, he had personally stopped a truck matching the witness's description. A black 1978 Ford pickup. The driver? Vincent Hale. At the time, Hale said he was coming home from a repair job. No clear signs of guilt. Cole had let him go. He had lived with the regret ever since. Now Lydia Marsh was proof. Hale had lied. Cole stood, grabbed his coat, and turned to Turner. "We're paying." "Vincent Hale, a visit." Vincent Hale's auto repair shop sat on the corner of East Warren Avenue, a squat brick building whose faded sign, Hale's Auto Solutions, clung stubbornly to the rusted frame above the entrance. The shop had barely changed since the 1980s. Same cracked pavement, same peeling paint, same dim yellow lights flickering inside. Detective Aaron Cole found the familiarity sickening. He stepped out of the car with Turner at his side. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked. "I've waited 40 years, he replied. They entered the shop. Inside, Vincent Hale stood over an open engine, his hands black with grease. He was older now, mid-60s, with thinning gray hair and a slow, steady posture. But his eyes, those hadn't changed. Cold, watchful, calculating. He turned as they approached. "Detectives," he said calmly, wiping his hands on a rag. "What can I do for you?" Cole didn't waste time. "We found a body at the Packard plant tonight." Vincent's hand stopped mid-motion. "A body?" he repeated. "So what does that have to do with me?" "A teenage girl," Turner added, "sealed under a welded steel plate." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "Terrible. But I still don't see—" Cole opened a folder. Inside, Lydia's photo, her hair, her smile, her youth frozen in time. Vincent's expression flickered, just for a second. That was enough. Cole stepped closer. "You knew her." "I knew a lot of people in the 80s. "But you denied knowing her in 1984, Cole pressed, "even though your shop was 3 blocks from where she disappeared." Vincent shrugged. "Memory fades." Cole leaned in, voice low. "Does your memory also forget the black Ford pickup you owned, and that it vanished 3 months after Lydia disappeared?" Vincent didn't answer. Turner crossed her arms. "We're reopening the investigation. You'll need to come in for formal questioning." Vincent finally met Cole's eyes. "After 40 years, you're still obsessed with that girl?" Cole stared back, unblinking. "I made a promise," he said softly. "And I keep my promises." For a long moment, Vincent didn't move. Then, "I'm not going anywhere," Vincent said coolly. "You want me at the station, I'll be there tomorrow morning." Cole knew better. People who said that usually didn't show up, but he let Vincent walk, for now. Because tonight, Cole wasn't looking for a confession. He was looking to see if Vincent Hale still lied, and every word tonight told him the answer. Yes. The Detroit Forensic Center smelled of disinfectant and metal. Clean, sterile, clinical. A stark contrast to the rotting industrial ruins where Lydia had been found. Megan Cole stood over the steel examination table, her gloves on, her expression steady but hollow. Her father entered the room slowly. The sheet-covered remains were laid, out in careful anatomical order, every bone catalogued, every fragment preserved. "She was sealed for decades," Megan said quietly. "That's why she's in this condition. The air inside the chamber was dry, almost like a time capsule." Cole swallowed. "Cause of death?" "We're still working on that," Megan said, "but preliminary signs show trauma to the skull." "A blow?" Cole asked. Megan nodded. "Yes, possibly with a heavy tool." "A mechanic's tool." Cole's jaw tightened. Megan continued. "There's something else." She walked to a tray beside the remains and lifted a transparent evidence bag. Inside was a small silver pendant. "The locket," Cole whispered. Megan carefully opened it with micro-tools. Inside, 2 minuscule photos. Left, Lydia. Right, a boy around 17, smiling shyly. Cole froze. A boy. "Who is he?" Cole whispered. "We don't know yet," Megan replied. "But the photo looks personal, intimate." This was new. This wasn't in the 1984 case file. Lydia's parents had never mentioned a boyfriend. Megan added, "There's more. We found fibers on her shirt, blue microfiber. Modern testing shows they match upholstery typical of pickup trucks from the 1980s. Cole nodded grimly. "The Ford," he said. "Yes," Megan confirmed. "Anything else?" Megan hesitated. "Dad, the steel chamber wasn't sealed by accident." Cole frowned. "What do you mean?" She pulled up a blueprint comparison on the screen. The chamber was custom built, welded with industrial precision. Whoever made it had welding skills and access to factory equipment from that era. Cole exhaled slowly. Vincent Hale had worked part-time at the Packard facility in the early 80s before it shut down. Everything was converging. Every road pointed back to him. Megan looked at her father, worry tightening her features. "Dad, if this case breaks, it'll be the biggest Detroit cold case solved in decades." Cole nodded. and I'm not stopping until we get the truth." The next morning, Cole and Turner visited the Marsh household, what remained of it. Lydia's mother, Helen Marsh, now 83, lived alone in a small retirement home on the edge of Detroit. Her eyes were dimmer, her steps slower, but her memory, that was still painfully sharp. She recognized Cole immediately. "Aaron," she whispered, tears welling, "please tell me you found her." Cole sat beside her, gently taking her hand. "Yes," he said softly. "We found her yesterday." Helen broke down in quiet, trembling cries, grief mixed with relief, decades overdue. Turner placed a comforting hand on her back. When Helen finally calmed, she whispered, Where was she?" "Hidden under the Packard plant," Cole answered. Helen closed her eyes. "I always knew someone took her. She would never leave." Cole nodded. "Mrs. Marsh, we found something with her. A locket with 2 photos. Helen's face shifted. Fear, recognition, sorrow. Cole opened the evidence photo. Inside, Lydia and the unknown boy. Helen stared at the photo for a long time before speaking. "That's Jonathan Reed," Cole frowned. "We never had his name in 1984, Helen nodded slowly. "They kept it secret. Lydia's father didn't approve. Jonathan was from a rough neighborhood, home problems. But Lydia loved him." Cole asked, "Did he drive?" Helen hesitated. "Yes," she whispered. "He had a black pickup truck." Cole froze. Turner's eyes widened. A second suspect, one never documented, one who had vanished from the records. Cole leaned forward. "Where is Jonathan now?" Helen shook her head. "I don't know. He disappeared from the neighborhood before Lydia did. Nobody saw him again." Cole and Turner exchanged a look. 2 black trucks, 2 men, 2 motives, 2 missing pieces. Cole stood. "This case isn't just opening," he murmured. "It's exploding." The late-night snowstorm had finally eased, leaving Detroit glazed in a thin sheet of frost. Inside the precinct, fluorescent lights hummed faintly as Detective Marlowe stood over the evidence board, arms crossed, jaw tight. Every new clue added more weight, but also more clarity. Officer Priya Desai entered, holding 2 styrofoam cups of coffee. "Chief wants to see you," she said quietly. "Says it's urgent." Marlowe took the coffee but didn't drink. "Did they identify the fingerprints on the steel plate?" Desai shook her head. "Not fully. Partial matches only. But the lab said something else turned up." "What?" She lowered her voice. "Traces of refrigerant chemicals. Industrial grade. The kind used in the old refrigeration warehouses along the riverfront." Marlowe froze. The old riverfront warehouses had been abandoned since the late 90s. One of them, he remembered, used to be managed by a man named Silas Crowley, a name that had popped up in the 1984 missing person files more than once, but never strongly enough to build a case. "Bring up everything we have on Crowley," Marlowe said. "Old employment records, property deeds, affiliations, everything." Desai nodded and slipped out. 2 hours later, Marlowe and Desai stepped out of their cruiser into the frigid air of Detroit's riverfront. The warehouse loomed like a sleeping beast. Massive steel doors, windows shattered, walls tagged by decades of graffiti. "This place reeks of trouble," Desai muttered. Marlowe pushed the door open. Cold air flooded out. The inside smelled of dust, oil, and something else, something metallic. They moved cautiously, flashlights sweeping over broken machinery and dangling chains. Frost clung to the floor like thin white veins. "Look," Desai whispered. At the far end of the warehouse was an old walk-in freezer. Its door was rusted, warped, but still intact. Marlowe approached slowly. The small inspection window was smeared with something dark. He wiped it with his sleeve and stiffened. Inside, behind the fogged glass, was a single leather glove, and beside it, a human shape. "Get forensics," Marlowe said. "Now." Desai stepped back, dialing frantically. Marlowe kept staring into the tiny window. The body inside wasn't simply stored. It had been posed, kneeling, hands folded, head bowed, like someone forced into a final prayer. By evening, the freezer had been opened under controlled conditions. The frozen body inside, male, mid-30s, signs of blunt force trauma, was carefully removed and placed onto a heated gurney. The medical examiner, Dr. Kiana Lopez, studied the remains under bright surgical lights. "This isn't recent," she said. "I'd put this somewhere between 1982 and 1985, judging by tissue degradation and refrigeration effects." Marlowe nodded grimly. "Cause of death?" "Massive cranial fracture. The victim was struck from behind with significant force, but that's not the strangest part." She lifted the man's hand. In his palm was a small metal tag with an inscription barely visible under frost. She handed it to Marlowe with tweezers. He squinted, reading the faint engraving. "E.F. Forgive me," Desai inhaled sharply. "E.F. like Ellen Fisher, the woman who'd vanished in 1984. The same woman the children's drawings seemed to hint at, the same case all the clues were circling back to." Marlowe felt a chill, and not from the freezer. If the initials were the same, this meant something far bigger. This man wasn't Ellen Fisher, but he knew her, or knew what happened to her, and someone wanted that message preserved, literally frozen in time. Back at the precinct, Marlowe pinned the metal tag onto the evidence board. Desai typed rapidly. "Found something," she said. "Look." She turned the monitor toward him. A scanned copy of an old 1984 witness list filled the screen. One name, half smudged but still readable, sat near the bottom. Silas Crowley, maintenance contractor, Packard plant, riverfront cold storage. Marlowe exhaled slowly. Crowley had access. Crowley knew the layout. Crowley could weld shut a steel plate under a factory floor. And Crowley disappeared from Detroit records in 1986. "Get the last known address," Marlowe said, "and check for relatives still in state." Desai's fingers flew. "He has one surviving family member," she said. "A nephew, lives in Dearborn. Name's Adrian Crowley." Marlowe grabbed his coat. "Let's pay him a visit." The small house on Pine Ridge Lane looked quiet, almost peaceful. Christmas lights still hung from the gutters, even though the holiday had passed months ago. A man in his early 40s answered the door. "Adrian Crowley?" Marlowe asked. Adrian nodded cautiously. "Yeah, something wrong?" "We're with DPD. We need to talk about your uncle, Silas Crowley." A shadow crossed Adrian's expression. "Come in," he said softly. Inside, the house was tidy but filled with old photographs. Family gatherings, fishing trips, birthdays. Adrian sat heavily on the sofa. "My uncle. He wasn't a good man," he began. "But he wasn't a killer. At least, I don't think he was." "What made you doubt him?" Desai asked. Adrian swallowed. "He used to have nightmares, violent ones. He'd scream about the girl in the corridor, and he always kept his basement locked. He said some things in life need to stay buried." Marlowe leaned forward. "When did you last see him?" 1986. He left Detroit suddenly. No note, no goodbye. My father, he always suspected he'd done something terrible." "Do you know where he went?" Adrian hesitated, then stood up, crossed the room, and opened an old drawer. He pulled out a torn envelope. "This came in the mail in 1999, he said. Marlowe took it carefully. Inside was a slip of paper, stained and crumbling. 3 words were scrawled in trembling handwriting. "It wasn't me." Detective Marlowe stared at the crumpled slip of paper in Adrian's trembling hand. "It wasn't me." 3 words that felt less like a denial and more like a confession with the edges sanded off. "When you received this letter," Marlowe asked carefully, "did you tell anyone?" Adrian shook his head. "My father didn't want the police involved. He said my uncle had demons, and sometimes demons drag you down with them." Desai exchanged a glance with Marlowe. "Do you recognize the handwriting?" she asked. Adrian hesitated, then nodded. "It's his. I'd seen him write hundreds of notes when I was a kid. Same shaky loops, same crooked S." Marlowe folded the paper back into the envelope. "Adrian, do you know where he mailed it from?" Adrian swallowed. "That's the strange part. There was no city stamp, no return address, just a faded postmark number." Marlowe frowned. "Can I see it?" Adrian handed him the envelope. The postmark was barely visible, just Nuckertu 147. A number with no city name, a ghost location. "Thank you," Marlowe said, rising. "If we have more questions, we'll come back." Adrian's eyes grew moist. "Detective, if my uncle really did something, I need to know. I need the truth, even if it destroys everything I believed." Marlowe placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll find it." Back in the car, Desai typed rapidly into the police database. Postmark 2147, checking. Seconds ticked by. Then, "No match," she muttered. "No city, no district, nothing. It's like it was stamped by a phantom post office." Marlowe stared out the windshield. "Try older archives." She opened a dusty database rarely touched. Legacy USPS codes discontinued in the late 80s. After a moment, her eyes widened. "Got it." Marlowe leaned closer. Postmark number 7 belonged to a temporary mail processing station used only once during the winter of 1999 for a construction project on the outskirts of northern Michigan. A station that was operational for exactly 19 days, then dismantled. Marlowe exhaled slowly. "So the letter came from somewhere near the old Upper Peninsula logging routes," Desai nodded. "That's wilderness, miles of forest, perfect place for someone to disappear or hide." Marlowe's face hardened with determination. "Get the state records. I want every abandoned cabin, worksite, and hunting lodge within a 50-mile radius of that temporary postmark station." The next morning, after hours of searching aerial images and land deeds, Desai printed a map and laid it across the evidence table. 5 possible structures, she said, but this one, she tapped a cabin symbol deep inside the Huron National Forest, was rented briefly in 1999 under a fake name, cash, no ID, and the rental manager described the tenant as a thin older man with a limp. Marlowe felt the pieces slide together. Silas Crowley had a limp from an old machinery accident in '83. "Pack the gear," Marlowe said. "We're going north." The forest felt ancient, towering pines, snow-packed ground, the wind whispering through branches like distant voices. Marlowe and Desai trudged through the untouched snow for nearly an hour before the cabin appeared through the trees. It was small, weather-beaten, a lonely structure that seemed to watch them rather than merely exist. Desai steadied her breath. No footprints, no signs of recent activity. Marlowe approached the door and touched the knob. Ice cold, locked. He stepped back, pulled out a small rule bar. "Move." With a sharp snap, the lock gave way. The door creaked open. Inside was darkness, stale, heavy, suffocating. Marlowe clicked his flashlight. A small room, a wooden table, a collapsed cot, papers scattered across the floor like leaves, and on the far wall, carved directly into the wood, were 4 chilling words. "I saw her too." Desai whispered, "Oh my God." Marlowe's heartbeat slowed, heavy as thunder. If these words belonged to Silas Crowley, it meant only one thing. He hadn't run from guilt. He'd run from fear. As they searched the cabin, Marlowe's boot struck something hollow beneath a plank. He knelt, pried it up. A small metal box lay hidden in the dust. Desai inhaled sharply. "Open it." Marlowe lifted the lid. Inside were a rusted Polaroid camera, an old silver key, a folded map of Detroit from 1984, and a note written in the same shaky handwriting. "I tried to warn them. She wasn't the only one taken. Find the others, before he does." The blood in Desai's face drained. "Before who does?" she whispered. Marlowe didn't answer, because beneath the note was something worse, a photograph, a blurred Polaroid of a shadowy figure standing in a corridor of the Packard plant, holding a woman by her wrists. The Polaroid trembled slightly in Marlowe's gloved hand. The image was low quality but unmistakable. A tall figure, face obscured, standing in one of the Packard plant's forgotten corridors. In front of him, a woman's silhouette, her posture limp, her wrists restrained. Desai's voice cracked the silence. That can't be Ellen Fisher, right? The timeline." "No," Marlowe said flatly. "It can't be. She disappeared in the fall of '84. This Polaroid stock wasn't even released until '86. So he took another girl." Desai's voice trailed off. "Or more than one." Marlowe slipped the photograph into an evidence sleeve. "Silas wasn't hiding because he was guilty," he murmured. "He was hiding because he saw something he was never supposed to see." The cabin seemed to grow colder. Outside, the wind howled like a warning. Back at the cabin's table, Marlowe spread out the 1984 Detroit map. Red circles were drawn in shaky ink: the Packard plant, the riverfront cold storage warehouses, a row of abandoned duplexes on Harrington Street, and an industrial tunnel system beneath Jefferson Avenue. Desai pointed at the tunnel mark. This wasn't in any police report from '84. Why would Silas know about it? Marlowe exhaled. Because during the early '80s, maintenance contractors like him worked in those tunnels. Detroit ran steam lines, electrical conduits, refrigeration pipes. Some corridors were never documented properly. So whoever he saw, Desai whispered, could move bodies through them without being detected. Marlowe nodded slowly. And could store them for years, decades. Desai's throat tightened. How many victims are we talking about? Marlowe folded the map. Too early to know, but one thing is clear: whoever our suspect is, he used Detroit's forgotten underground like his own hunting ground. Desai picked up the old silver key from the metal box. Look at the teeth, she said. This isn't a house key, too narrow. Marlowe studied it. And too long, he added. Could be for a storage unit, a locker, maybe an old city maintenance access room. He turned it over. A number was stamped faintly on the back. 39B. Marlowe's eyes narrowed. I've seen this format before. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through old city infrastructure archives. After a moment, there, he said, tapping a photo. Detroit used coded locks for underground maintenance access points. The B units were for the deeper steam tunnels. Desai's face paled. So Silas had a key to the lower levels? Marlowe nodded grimly. And probably used it in 1984. Desai stared at the key as if afraid it might burn her fingers. What was he doing down there? Maybe hiding, Marlowe said. Maybe running. Maybe witnessing something. He pocketed the key. We're going into the tunnels. 2 days later, Marlowe and Desai stood at the sealed entrance of access point B39, a rusted steel hatch behind a long abandoned power substation on Jefferson Avenue. A generator hummed behind them. Floodlights cut through the darkness. Forensics had verified the key belonged to this hatch. You ready? Marlowe asked silently. Desai nodded, swallowing hard. Marlowe inserted the key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, clack! The lock twisted. The hatch groaned open, releasing a wave of icy, stale air. The darkness below was absolute. Marlowe clicked his flashlight. A steep ladder descended into a concrete throat leading deep into the earth. After you, he said. Desai half smiled. If you hear me scream, you better be right behind me. They climbed down. The ladder rumbled with every step. Down, 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 until finally, Marlowe dropped to the floor with a metallic thud. A long corridor stretched in both directions, filled with old steam pipes, rusted valves, and graffiti from decades of trespassers. But one thing stood out. Bloody handprints on the wall. Old, faded, barely visible. Desai whispered, "This place feels wrong." Marlowe agreed silently, because the air was too still, too cold, too observed. They moved deeper. Each footstep echoed like something ancient waking from sleep. Pipes hissed softly overhead, releasing ghostly vapors that curled like fingers. At a junction, Desai stopped. "Do you hear that?" Marlowe raised a hand. A faint rhythmic tapping echoed from far down the tunnel. Not machinery, not water. Deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Marlowe's voice dropped to a whisper. "We're not alone." Desai lifted her weapon. The tapping grew louder. Then it stopped. Silence swallowed the tunnel. Marlowe motioned forward. They advanced slowly, lights cutting deeper into the black. As they turned a corner, the beam of Marlowe's flashlight froze on something lying across the floor. A metal toolbox, old, red, rusted. Desai knelt. "Silas?" "No," Marlowe said, shaking his head. Stamped on the lid were the initials, HM. Desai's eyes widened. "That's not Silas." "No," Marlowe whispered. "It's someone else from 1984. The red toolbox lay on the cold concrete floor, coated in decades of dust and rust. Marlowe crouched beside it, flashlight beam glinting off the metal corners. Desai hovered behind him, her weapon ready, flashlight slicing through the oppressive darkness. Marlowe carefully lifted the lid. Inside were several objects carefully arranged. A worn leather journal, pages brittle with age. A pair of work gloves, smeared with what appeared to be dried blood. Several small Polaroids, curled at the edges. A metal key, different from the one they had used to open the hatch. He picked up the journal. Its first page bore a date, July 20th, 1984, just 2 days after Lydia Marsh vanished. Marlowe's heart sank. "This was written the night after she disappeared," he whispered. Desai leaned over. "Whose handwriting is it?" Marlowe flipped through the pages. The writing was meticulous, shaky in places, and unmistakably the same shaky loops they had seen on the note from Silas Crowley. But the entries were different. Obsessive, angry, paranoid. "I thought it was done. I thought it would stay buried. But the girl's eyes follow me everywhere. If anyone sees, everything collapses. I will not be caught. I will not." Marlowe felt bile rise in his throat. "This isn't just Silas writing," he murmured. "He's documenting someone else's crimes." Desai frowned. "So, he was a witness, an accomplice, or a terrified observer?" Marlowe said grimly. "Either way, he knew too much. And now this journal tells us the locations, the victims, everything he feared would surface." Marlowe spread out the Polaroids across the tunnel floor. The photos were haphazard, torn at the edges, but each showed a shadowy figure, always a man, always near a victim. Some of the victims were clearly teenagers, some young adults, and in one of the last photos was Lydia Marsh. She looked terrified, kneeling in a dark corridor, her hair falling across her face. Marlowe picked up a folded piece of paper tucked between two photos. It was a list of names, not many, but chilling. Lydia Marsh, 17, missing July 1984. Jonathan Reed, 18, missing August 1984. Ellen Fisher, 16, missing October 1984. H.M. Initials only, unknown. Desai's face paled. "So, the guy in the tunnel?" she asked. "The one in the Polaroids? He did all this?" Marlowe nodded slowly. "Looks like it. Silas was just documenting, keeping a record, maybe hoping someone would find it one day." Desai swallowed. "And he thought he could hide it all underground forever." Marlowe shook his head. "But now we have it. The tunnels, the journal, the key, the Polaroids. It's enough to start connecting the dots." Marlowe examined the second metal key. It was stamped numbered 42C, similar in style to the first but clearly intended for a different access point. Desai's eyes widened. "Another underground entry?" Marlowe nodded. "Yes, and I bet it leads to the last place they stored. Her, or maybe even the others." He pulled out the map from the toolbox and cross-referenced the stamped number. "There's a tunnel junction not far from here," he said. "It connects to an old refrigeration unit under Jefferson Avenue. It was abandoned decades ago, but it matches the locations in the journal." Desai glanced at him, voice tight with anticipation. "So we're going deeper?" "Yes," Marlowe said. "We follow the key, and we finally find out who was really behind all this." Chapter 22. The Final Chamber. The entrance was smaller, tighter, a maintenance hatch barely big enough for one person to squeeze through. Marlowe unlocked it with Harsagrip 42C. The hinges creaked like the groan of a coffin. Inside, the tunnel opened into a narrow chamber. The smell hit them first, damp, metallic, centuries-old decay. Flashlights swept across the walls, and there it was, a small steel vault, welded shut and covered in rust. Marlowe's heart thundered. This had to be it. He carefully examined the welds. They were fresh compared to the rest of the tunnel, likely tampered with in the last few years. Desai whispered, voice tight with dread. "Could it still contain something?" Marlowe nodded. "Only one way to find out." He grabbed the cutting torch from their kit. Sparks flew, filling the chamber with bright orange light, reflecting off the steel walls. Minutes passed. The weld slowly gave way. And then, with a final metallic snap, the vault opened. Inside, a single mummified body, curled in the fetal position, hair reddish-brown, clothing decades old, Lydia Marsh. This section brings us closer to the shocking truth and the arrest. The story so far. Discovery of the body, Packard plant, 2013. Clues leading to Silas Crowley. Discovery of underground tunnels, journals, Polaroids, and other victims. Final chamber showing Lydia's body,